Thank you all for staying. I'm going to be talking about our project regarding the Acne Core Outcomes Acne Core Outcomes Research Network. So we are focused on developing and refining better ways to assess acne in a clinical trial setting. So what is the ACORN group? The ACORN group is very similar to the home group that exists for eczema, whose objective is to develop core outcome measures. It's very similar to other groups that belong to the idiom group, developing outcome measures for psoriasis or outcome measures for hidradenitis. So it's a group of like-minded individuals focused, in this case, on acne. So we have membership from pretty much all over the world. You can see the geographic distribution on the one side, and then we also have a variety of members from different backgrounds, both healthcare professionals and patients, and other people are involved as well, including representatives from industry and such. So these are the folks that are the official members, but in the process that I'm going to talk about today, this is the process that we went through to decide which outcomes are important to measure in an acne trial. So the ACORN group itself has several projects as part of this endeavor. We're doing systematic reviews of the impacts of acne. We're looking at better ways to assess acne lesion counts. We're looking at technologies for quantifying acne lesion counts. And what I'm focusing on here is our consensus exercise to develop a core set of outcome measures for use in clinical trials. So what are core outcomes? Simply put, core outcomes are the things that you want to measure in a clinical trial. You know, how is it at the beginning? How does it get better? So these are core outcomes. And the thought is that if all studies that are going to be evaluating acne can use the same core outcomes, and even more so, use the same ways to measure those core outcomes, which is like the next step for us to do, then it might be better in this day and age where it's very expensive to do head-to-head clinical trials of every acne medication. But if trials are done in a way that the outcomes are the same and that the measures are the same, then we would be able to use database methods to compare treatment A to treatment B without having to do that head-to-head trial. So that's the overall objective of what core outcomes are and why they are important. So in our process to decide upon what the core outcomes should be, we followed a Delphi procedure, which is very similar to many of the other groups that have done this type of exercise. So we had 3 different rounds. We initially wrote a protocol to state how the study was going to be conducted. And like many other groups, oftentimes there's deviations that need to be incorporated as a result of findings that we have as we go along. So in the first round, I think that we're actually quite proud that we had 500 participants in the first round. So this was done, it was done by a online survey, and we had, as I mentioned, 500 people from all over the world. We had almost 300 patients as well as 300 professionals. The numbers don't add up because many people identified themselves as being a professional and having been an acne patient, so that's why the numbers are higher. In the second round, after the first round, 260 of the 500 folks left their email address, so we were able to contact them to ask them to be in the second round. So for the second round, we had fewer numbers because only 260 left their email address. So of those 260, 164 participated in round 2. And then after round 2, we had 71% of that round 2 participate in round 3. So these are the 3 rounds that we went through. So in round 1, this is the demographic breakdown for the types of people that participated. We had 218 healthcare professionals, 307 patients or the parents of an acne patient. We had researchers from that weren't involved in the clinics per se. We also had people that were doing research in the pharmaceutical industry. We had 9 editors of dermatology journals participate in the process as well. And the demographic, you can see large numbers from the UK, which is where Drs. Anne Eady and Alison Layden, who are part of our team, are based. We also had a representation from North America, Europe, in the Far East, as well as Central and South America, Africa, Australasia, and people who didn't write down where they came from. So what we did, it was a pretty extensive procedure, combining results of systematic reviews, combining all of the available information that we could find. We were able to generate a large list of items that we thought would be good to put out into the questionnaire. So we narrowed the first questionnaire down to 24 items. And using a Likert scale, the participants were ranking that item as being important or not so important. And in that first exercise, we selected 12 items that came to the forefront. I'll just read you a couple of them. One was long-term control of acne, the physical signs of acne assessed by a healthcare provider, signs and symptoms of acne assessed by the patient, satisfaction with appearance, speed of improvement, self-esteem, global improvement by patient, healthcare provider, absence of acne flares. And what was interesting that didn't come in the top 12 was global acne severity assessed by a healthcare provider, which any of you that do acne clinical trials know that the global assessment of acne is one of the key cornerstones of any clinical trial. This didn't fall out as being important in the first round. And the other was health-related quality of life, which is also something that is often measured in clinical trials. So we thought that this was very interesting. So we made a small deviation of the protocol and included these extra 2 items in the next round of voting. So in round 2, we had the 12 items that made the cut and the couple that we added. And also in round 1, we asked the patients, or actually asked the participants, for other items that weren't on the list that they thought might be important. And one that was added in by patients was the extent, the bottom line, the extent of scars and dark marks, which turned out to be very important to patients, and it was very important also to the healthcare professionals. So the items that are in the bright yellow are the 4 items where consensus was reached in round 2. And these include satisfaction with treatment, which makes sense, long-term control of acne, which clearly is important to patients, and it's clearly important to providers. But the problem is, most acne trials are 12 weeks long. So how are you going to determine long-term control in a 12-week trial? So it's clear that this information is very important, and it really is escaping us in the way that clinical trials are currently being run. So this is something to consider, and it's opportunity for maybe novel ways of capturing this particular type of information. The other items that made the cut were satisfaction with appearance and the extent of scars or dark marks. But what was very interesting was the discrepancy between patients and healthcare professionals with regard to which signs and symptoms of acne should be assessed and who was going to assess them. So the physical signs assessed by a healthcare provider and the symptoms and signs assessed by a patient did not achieve consensus. Well, clearly it's important to measure the signs and symptoms of acne as part of any clinical trial. But what we learned from this process being an online process with large numbers of people, and we did the best that we could with providing educational materials and making all of the instructions in lay language. So there's still some misunderstanding between patients and providers about the signs and symptoms of acne and how they should be assessed. So this is where the face-to-face type consensus meetings can be very helpful. The challenge with the face-to-face meetings is that oftentimes they're attended by only very small numbers of patients. So we're currently exploring possibly other technology-based ways to allow that opportunity for discussion. So that's something that we hope to do. And the reason that we hope to do it on a large scale is because in order for us to get international buy-in on the outcomes as well as the outcome measures moving forward, it's important to have as much representation from all countries as we can. So these are things that we will continue to work on. So after this is just to highlight for you some of the differences between what patients thought and what healthcare professionals thought, which I thought was very interesting, but I don't have a mouse so I can't point and I can't see the screen, so excuse me. Okay. So if you look on the far side, this is signs of acne assessed by a physician. And up top are the patients in round 2. There was 52 of them. So 64% of the patients viewed that as being important. If you go down below where it says professionals, and the important score, 7 and 9, 71% of professionals thought that it was important for the physician to assess the signs of acne. So consensus wasn't reached on that. If you look at signs and symptoms as assessed by the patient, up top, obviously the patients thought that was important. Down below, the providers didn't think that it was so important, with 60.4%. Physician global severity of acne, also known as IGA type scores, only 47% of patients thought that that was important, and that in part could be due to perhaps a lack of understanding of what a global assessment scale is or what it might mean. But even amongst providers, 59% viewed a global assessment of acne as being important. So there's not even agreement amongst professionals. And I think part of that is for any of us that have done acne clinical trials, the idea of a global assessment seems rather simple, but when you actually try to do those measurements and align your patient right within those 4 or 5 scales, you always want to give them a half grade and grade them in between, which you can't do. So there's a lot of room for improvement in the global acne severity scales. If you look at global improvement in acne as assessed by the physician, 50% of patients thought it was important, 63% of providers, and patient-assessed global improvement, patients and thought it less important actually than providers. So these are the areas where there was some discrepancy and obviously room for more discussion. So as a result of this, we all agreed that signs and symptoms of acne are important as part of any clinical trial. But what we need to do moving forward is to assess exactly which signs should be measured. And symptoms, as you might imagine, will be evaluated by the patients. So our next steps in part are to, again, identify the signs to be measured and determine who's going to measure those signs, patients, providers, or maybe a combination of both. So in looking at round 3, we have some of the outcomes that we've decided on in the previous round. So it turns out that there was a lot of items that we had, and our protocol did allow for a yes-no vote if we wanted to go to that. So in the round 3, we put out our list of items, and then we just asked patients and providers to rank whether, yes, it should be included in the core outcome set, or no, it should not be included. And these are the breakdown of the folks that participated in the round 3. There were 83 professionals and 34 patients, and this is the geographic distribution for round 3. So when we asked the yes-no question of the items that we put forward, these are the items we put forward. So the only item on which agreement was reached was health-related quality of life. So in part of our round 3, both groups decided that this was important, and we did carry that further into our core outcome domain set. But if you look at, again, the global acne severity as assessed by a healthcare provider, also known as IGA, 56% of the patients voted no, and 83% of the professionals in this particular round voted yes. So again, we haven't reached a consensus on that, but since global severity of acne is a way of measuring an acne sign, we're going to move that into the discussion phase as we move forward. So our final core outcome domains, or the things that we reached agreement on in terms of what should be measured in a clinical trial, include things like satisfaction with appearance, the extent of scars or dark marks, long-term acne control, the signs and symptoms of acne, which we need to break down and do some more work in that section, satisfaction with treatment received, health-related quality of life, and adverse events, which I didn't mention up until now, but adverse events are obviously captured in every clinical trial, so it's something that should be measured. So some of these, I think that we can work together to identify outcome measures for those, things like satisfaction with appearance or satisfaction with treatment might be a little bit easier. Things that are going to be very hard to come to agreement on and need a lot more further work will be the signs and symptoms of acne, and again, we need a up-to-date evaluation of some of the the health-related quality of life outcome scales. So our next steps, we continue our work. We're doing the systematic reviews. Again, we're going to reach consensus on which signs of acne to measure and who should measure them. We also have, I didn't talk about today, but we have an online module for acne training that includes instruction as well as instructional videos. And we're also continuing our work on evaluating novel strategies for evaluating acne lesion counts. We have formed affiliation with the Idiom Group, who looks at psoriasis, HS, and acne as part of us. We also work closely with the Cochrane Skin Group, their Core Outcome Set initiative, and also with the Forum for Improving Clinical Trials in Acne, which is a European-based group. And we'd like to thank our sponsors. Our NIAMS has been our biggest sponsor, and without that support, we never would have gotten the acorn to hatch, I guess you could say, or sprout. And we also have received data from other companies as well, and as well as support from one company for parts of the work related to the online modules. So thank you.